Let me give a warm welcome to everyone for this journey around the world. And I don't know how long a supersonic jet takes, but I think we're going to go a little faster tonight than even the fastest of airplanes. Maybe the spacecraft could do it in 75 minutes. We're going to try and hit some different highlights of things that God is doing around the world, and also that Wildwood has had the privilege of investing in. We don't always have a lot of time on Sunday mornings to talk about this. There's snapshots here and there. We'll bring people up to the stage and they can tell a little bit about what's going on in their corner of the world. But tonight, I'd like to try and give a big picture of different things. Unfortunately, we won't be able to dive into great detail with every partner that we have. We have about 25 different individuals and institutions that we work with. But we'll try to give some good snapshots of probably about 10, 8 to 10 or so. We have a nice selection of slides and images and even a video and a couple other things coming up, so I think you'll get a good impression there. You know, when we think about what God is doing in the world, it's amazing to think that we have a chance to participate in it. And it's not advancing here. I'm not sure. It's advancing on my computer, Josh, but check the connection here. In the preseason trial, it worked just fine. Yeah.
It should.
Try it again. There we go. All right, just had to wake up. It's amazing to think of what God is doing. You know, sometimes we think of missions and it's the courage of the missionary or somebody that has some altruistic motives is doing something, and sometimes we stand back and think, wow, that's amazing, or I wish I could do that, or I'm glad that I know somebody that does that sort of thing. But really, when you step behind the curtain, it's God that's promoting His own program. And we see this in hundreds and hundreds of scriptures. But one of the key scriptures, even in the Old Testament, I would say one of the key verses of the entire Old Testament is found here in Genesis, kind of at the beginning of Abraham's story. And God, in His initial call to Abraham, said that God will bless those who bless Abraham. The one who curses, I will curse, and in you, in Abraham, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Well, there's multiple ways to look at that blessing. You can think of the ultimate blessing that would come in the person of Jesus Christ, a descendant of Abraham. But as you look at the life of Abraham and then his children, his grandchildren, and certainly in the case of Israel, you see that they, in fact, were a blessing for many, many other people. So God was beginning to unfold His purposes even then. A lot of times we look at the Old Testament and we think it's just the story of Israel and not much else. Not sure what Bruce did, but did you lay hands on it? Is that? Yeah, maybe. Well, the master is going to come up and fix this again, I trust. Let me just mention the next verse is Isaiah 49:6, and it's one of many in the Old Testament that looks at the missions commission for Israel itself. And again, the common mentality is that Israel was the focus of the Old Testament. God was strictly dealing with them. In fact, if there were other nations, it was nations that Israel was warring with. But this verse is fascinating because it says that it's too small a thing for the servant of the Lord just to redeem the house of Jacob. Too small of a thing. And he completes the verse by saying, he will be a light to all the nations. The servant, Jesus Christ, will be a light to all the nations. So it was a very stark, a very clear reminder to Israel that God's purpose was never just to bless one nation, even in the Old Testament, but that His purpose was to reach all the nations. You reconnecting back there?
Yeah, see what you can do. I don't know why it's not working.
We've got another verse, and this is the end of the biblical presentation. Looking at the New Testament, if you were to fast forward in the sequence, and going from Genesis to Revelation, that's definitely fast forward. But in Revelation 5, we see that in the consummation of the ages, that God will in fact have reached, He will have reached all the nations, all the cultures, all the languages. So it's just a beautiful scene as we're looking at the throne and all these different multi-hued, multicolored, multi-linguistic peoples gathered around the throne. So you think of the humble beginnings back in Genesis, God calling just a few individuals here and there, forming a family, a nation, but always to serve as His witness. So when we get up to the New Testament, God using the nation, or rather the church, as His witness to bring about this consummation of His work in the end times. And in the end times, we can see clearly it's a prophecy and a promise for us that God will in fact bring this about. One verse kind of in between, all right, let me try this. There's Revelation. All right, I think we're cooking now. So one verse in between that really applies to Wildwood is in 2 Corinthians 5, 18 and 19. So in this process of God bringing about the redemption, His plan of redemption in the entire world and saving many people, it never promises that every person in the world will be saved, but that representatives from all the different peoples, the different subcultures of the world will in fact be represented there before the throne. So during this process, he says, all these things are from God, who reconciled us to Himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. Now that's humbling to think, just in and of itself. We've been given the ministry of reconciliation. God was in Christ reconciling the world to Himself, and we are ambassadors for Christ as though God were making His appeal through us. So as we go about our day-to-day lives here in Norman, as we interact with neighbors, coworkers, and other people, we are ambassadors before these people. But the church itself has a role to not just be ambassadors where it's convenient. We need to be ambassadors where God wants us. And He wants to redeem the entire world. So sometimes there's cultures, subcultures, languages that don't have a single representative that will stand before the throne. So what a good ambassador needs to do is, on occasion, go where he or she is sent. So that's our opportunity as well. God wants to use us. We're a mouthpiece, a spokesperson for God Himself. So I look at what Wildwood is doing and what we have the privilege of doing. Really, it's an honor. Many times it's hard and involves some sacrifice, but it's just a tremendous honor that no one is worthy of. None of us. We're not worthy of salvation, nor being called into service. And yet God has given us this privilege to participate in His work. Now I want to kind of scan the globe here, and this will be kind of quick, but really we're going to focus tonight on 4 different regions. These are regions that we've determined that Wildwood has some different connections to, and we try to focus on in the Global Outreach team. We're not opposed to other things that are going on in the world. In fact, we many times provide support and encourage people about other things that are going on. But we'll look first at Latin America, then Europe, Middle East, and finally the Far East and Asia. So in Latin America, 4 different couples that we support, 4 partners from Wildwood, are working in this part of the world. And as you think about what they're doing, the focus really primarily is on evangelism and church planting. And that in itself is just remarkable when you think of the long perspective, here in 120 years, what God has already done. So you might have the impression, well, missions needs to take place every place to the same degree. Well, it's not really true. There's definitely a need for that pioneer evangelist in many places in the Americas but not in every place. If anyone was here in 1900, less than 0.5% of all the people, some 60 million people, would be considered evangelicals in Latin America. Less than 0.5%. So one in, was that 1 in 200, one in more or less? Today, the estimate is around 17%, so about 1 in 7 people. And the population is 10 times larger, so over 600 million people, and yet the church is just really mushroomed in many of these countries. There's still a lot of pockets that have not been reached. You can look at a country like Uruguay, which is extremely secular, and think, well, they need pioneer work to go on there. Some of the indigenous groups, not all of them, but some of the indigenous groups also need that pioneer work. And there's other subcultures besides those. But God is doing an amazing thing in many, many places in Latin America. So Mexico is one of the places that we've focused on for quite some time. And when you look just at the population of Mexico, in 1960, a little less than 40 million people, and as stands to reason, it's been growing. So in 2020, almost 30 million people living in Mexico. High birth rate, population keeps growing. So the population of Mexico. What's exciting is that you look at the number of evangelicals percentage, and in 1960 there were about 2%. Now you have to follow this part of the graph here. About 2% evangelicals, and today it's around 10%. So the population has grown from 40 to 130 million, and at the same time, the number of evangelicals in Mexico has grown from 2% to almost 10%. So in other words, the church is growing much faster than the rate of population. And it's not that every Mexican is an evangelical now. You run into lots and lots of people that are not. But more and more is the case that Mexicans at least know somebody that has become an evangelical. So the partners that we support are still trying to work in some of those pockets where the gospel just hasn't gotten. If you go to some of the southernmost states of Mexico, you'll find a lot of believers. Sometimes 20, even 30% of the state population will consider themselves evangelical. But in other parts, less than 5%, and in some communities, none at all. So Zach and Jennifer Maltanner are one couple that we support, and they've been working. They actually went to Mexico definitively. They went on short-term trips before, but they moved there, went through the process of learning the language, learning the culture, and then just about a year and a half ago, they moved to a little community, about 60,000 people, not so tiny, but 60,000 people just north of Mexico City, a city called Amialco. And in Amialco, there's not a single Bible church. There are a few believers, but there's no church that faithfully presents the gospel, or the biblical message week after week. You think here in Norman, maybe twice that size, 120,000 or maybe a little bit more, how many Bible churches do we have? I mean, if you've been here at any time, you can probably start making a mental list of 10, 15, maybe 20 just Bible churches without even thinking about the denominational churches that you could add to that list. So they're in a community and they're working with another couple, trying to establish a church. And the strategy that they've employed is really interesting. Maybe in olden days, a missionary could get that missionary visa, step into the country, stand on the street corner, preach the gospel with a megaphone, hand out tracts, and expect little by little to have a few interested peoples form a Bible study. Maybe from that Bible study comes a church. That may still happen in some places, but more so it's the necessity of building relationships with people, with non-Christians particularly. So Zach and Jennifer have this strategy of not just living in Amialco and meeting people in the store, but Zach is a self-defense instructor. He knows martial arts, and they've set up a studio. Wildwood has helped with that, a little bit of manpower, and then also some grants that we've supplied. And they've set up a studio where he'll invite people to come and learn about self-defense. And it's interesting. He'll build a relationship with these people as he's fighting them at the same time, or teaching them to defend themselves. And Jennifer will use the studio also because she's a Zumba instructor. So the two of them have this interesting strategy, basically to build bridges to the non-Christians around them, and maybe to show that Christians don't just are not just stuck in the mud, do one thing and nothing else, but they're interesting people. And especially build relationships, and through those relationships, see people come to Christ. So we're just really proud of them. They're a great couple. They were here just a couple months ago. They have a daughter, Summer, who is just over a year old now, and we're just proud that they're facing all the challenges that there are of living in a community without a whole lot of believers, and yet wanting to serve the Lord while they're there. Some of the other couples that we support in this part of the world, Phil, Mary, and Shane, have been in Mexico for a lot longer, almost as long as Wildwood has been a church. We've had the privilege of being a partner with them. And their current ministry is kind of more of an itinerant one. So they'll go to a lot of smaller communities. I went with them during a summer trip a couple years ago, and 5 different days, 5 different communities, set up a big tent, medical, dental, a lot of other things going on there. And hundreds of people coming, not just for the medical reasons, but also just to see what's going on. These are communities where there's not a lot going on, not much different, and this is probably the event of the year. So Phil has gone into a lot of these communities and counting on the help of Christian believers in Mexico, he's done a number of these campaigns. More recently, with COVID, and also with, I don't know if you recall, but in June of last year, there was a major earthquake in southern Mexico. So Phil has been, going 90-0 with relief. And people that he knows, that he loves, trying to help pastors that have lost their house, that have been put out, people that have become unemployed all of a sudden. So just lots and lots of things going on. And Phil has been doing a lot of the relief work. Yes, Craig. Yeah, it's a good question. The influence of Catholicism. It kind of depends on country to country, and I'm going to talk, for example, about Brazil in just a minute. If you were to go to Brazil when we did, most people, 80%, would probably consider themselves Catholic. But firm Catholics, convinced, card-carrying Catholics, probably less than 10%. So if you were to go to the cathedral on any given Sunday, you would see a very, very small percentage of people actually attending. And a lot of the people that consider themselves Catholic are actually syncretist, because there's a mixture of some elements of Catholicism and other things, and not necessarily Christian things. But in their mind, it kind of makes sense.
So they worship statues and Virgin Mary?
Yeah, maybe not quite that blunt, but in Brazil, for example, there's a lot of African influence. So there's African deities that have kind of been imported and they've been mixed together. Mexico is more Catholic than Brazil, and I think that one of the reasons it's been a little bit harder in Mexico than in Brazil has been that it's more of a staunch Catholicism. But even so, Zach and Jennifer have a wide open field. I'm sure that they meet some staunch Catholics from time to time, but there's lots of people that don't have any faith. They may say, I'm a Catholic, but I don't really know anything about the Bible. They don't know any of the cardinal doctrines. So they're basically just starting from scratch. There's usually a lot of respect, which is great. They respect the Bible. They respect somebody that calls themselves a Christian. It's a great question. So Phil and Mary Ann have been in Mexico for quite a long time. Becca and I were actually the first missionaries from Wildwood, sent out from here, I won't tell you the year, but a while back, going to Brazil and working there up until 2011. Chase and Julie have been in Nicaragua also for several years. They're relocated back to Norman, and you may see them around the church. Brazil, just a comparison here, so the population is a little bit larger. 1960, maybe about double the population, 80, 2000, 2020. So maybe about 50% larger in terms of population. And what's interesting is that this growth chart, the graph here below, the line that's for Mexico, when you compare it to Brazil, Brazil is just, it's blowing the doors off. So just in the time that we were there, we would hear stories occasionally at the beginning of people that had been persecuted, that had been run out of town or disowned by their families. Well, now, many times those same families, the entire family has come to Christ. And people would talk about churches with 500, with 1,000 people, evangelical Protestant churches, just huge, and really God is doing a lot. There's a lot of confusion. Brazil has a lot of needs, but it's just neat to think of what God has already done in that country. Part of our involvement as a church in Brazil is through an institution. We have a partnership with Compassion International, which you probably have heard of. It's one of the largest Christian organizations in the world. Well, Compassion has lots of different things going on. They not only sponsor children to help children materially, but they also have been engaged in church planting. And what piqued my interest and the church's interest as we learned about this emphasis is that they're working in many parts of Brazil, those pockets that have been unevangelized. In fact, we came into contact with a man right here, Josepha, who had already planted one compassion project in the state of Piauí in the north, which is the least reached state of the 26 in Brazil. And the community where he was in, PDPD, was one of the least reached communities in Piauí. So you can think kind of the uttermost parts almost of Brazil. And what he was planning was to go into an even further, a more remote community, a smaller one, and start a second project. Well, it coincided with our interest, and great to work with somebody that has a track record. So we went to Lagoa de São Francisco, or Lake San Francisco, to check it out. And about 2 years ago, the church invested startup funds to get the Compassion Project started in Lake San Francisco. So here you can see some of the kids. Here's the team. Joseph and his wife and his family have moved on to another project since then, but this team is still there. And it's been interesting, even in the midst of COVID. So they got a running start before they even had a building. They were having baptisms and people that were coming to faith, and a community that really only had about 4 or 5 believers altogether. About 6,000 people in the community, and just less than a handful of people that really knew Christ. But from that, within about 6 months, they had 30 that were gathered. 6 months after that, they dedicated the building that we had helped them to build, and the building was full. It was full upon inauguration. Over 200 people there. Not all of them members of the church, but the mayor and lots of people from the community came down to check out and see what was going on. So it's been just really incredible. 200 kids, more or less, involved in this project, and about as many families from Wildwood that have stepped up and agreed to sponsor one of the kids. So Compassion's work is kind of 2 or 3-fold. Part of it's material, helping kids that are on the edge of poverty or maybe in poverty itself, helping them to survive and the families. Also educational. It's kind of a school reinforcement. Schools are very precarious in this community. And definitely spiritual, where the kids hear the gospel and they're being exposed to the Bible's lessons. So a lot of these 200 kids have come to faith. It's not an obligation. You don't have to be a Christian to be a part of the project. But they hear the gospel and they're engaged with that, so many of them have come to faith. You know, I've been to Lake San Francisco 3 times, and the first time was before they had started the project, just kind of spying the land. And I met some people as Joseph was taking me through the community, went back for the building inauguration a year later, and then at the beginning of last year, January of last year, I had the privilege to go back just to kind of check and see how things were going. And as I was there this last time, Joseph and I were driving out of town, and if you're ever with him, he's an incredible guy, and he would drive real slow going through town, and it seemed like every person that he saw on the sidewalk, he knew already. You know, he'd only been living there about a year and a half, but he's one of these guys who's very outgoing. He's always engaging people. And so we're driving out, and there was this young man that was seated on the sidewalk. And as Joseph pulled up, the young guy came over and stuck his hand through the window, shook her hands. And Joseph talked to him for just a minute, and then we drove on. And it made me think, and I asked him as we were driving away, I said, when I was here 2 years ago, you introduced me to a family. In fact, it was one of the few evangelical families in the community. And I remember that there was a young man in that family that had some developmental issues. And do you know anything about them? And really, if I were to backtrack just a couple of years, it was really a difficult situation for me to deal with. This was, 2018, January 2018. And he had wanted me to get to know this carpenter and his wife. Went into their home, just a ramshackle house, very poor. But these are the believers. These are the ones with a good testimony in the community. And as I was talking to this couple, they said, well, would you like to meet our son? And their son, I think it must be cerebral palsy. But he was probably a teenager. He was probably 13, 14 years old. And they had done what they could when he was smaller to protect him and to keep him from harming himself. And they would put away things. They would try to keep him in certain areas, and they were always vigilant. Well, at night, he got to the point where they were just concerned for his safety. Now, this is a community, no hospital. There's no resident doctor, no resident nurse. If you're going to get medical help, you've got to go some distance. And poor family, precarious healthcare system, so just very, very limited options. And they're just, pulling their hair out, trying to figure out what to do. So they built, I won't say a cage, but they built a cell in their dining room. And it was one of the most pathetic things I've ever seen in terms of just stirring your emotions. This kid was living on one side of this wall. The door was locked, and they said, yeah, he spends most of the day in there. We'll let him out, take him around, do different things. But in this cell, you could look through a little opening where they gave him food, and there was nothing in there. It was just a raised concrete platform that he could sleep on. They said, anything else, he's going to use it and probably harm himself. And we can't be 24/7. We don't have any help to do anything. So this kid was back there, and it reminded me of Jesus and the Gadarene demoniac. But this couple trying to do their best and probably asking God, help us do something. So that was the young man that I was thinking about as we were driving out of town 2 years later. And I asked Josephiah, whatever happened to him? He said, well, it was that young man that came up to the car. And I did not recognize him. But Josephiah said that as the family got established in the gospel, and as they had help from other believers, new believers, they were able to work with their child more and see developmental progress to the point that he was able to be left alone and to be there, come up and greet us. And we drove away, and it's like, just the power of the Lord. The power of the Lord. The gospel taking root in a family's life and turning things around. So I was praising the Lord just for what he can do. Not every case, not every child that compassion deals with has that dramatic of needs, but it is amazing to think of what God is able to do. Here's just this past Christmas, here's a photo that they told us that during the course of this past year, if you sponsor one of the kids, they were still distributing food baskets to the families so that they'd have enough to eat, and they also had school supplies that they were distributing, and they had a big 6-day Christmas celebration. 540 people out of 6,000 in the community came to the church to participate and hear the gospel during these ceremonies. So the team is still real busy. I want to move on from compassion to another organization. I'm just going to touch on this briefly, but Word of Life is a training institution that Beck and I worked at for many years, and Wildwood has had the privilege of working with several different groups around the world that they're not necessarily on the front line, but they're preparing people to go to the front lines. So young people to enter into ministry or just to be good witnesses, and where we worked at Word of Life, all told, there's been about 3,000 graduates, most of them in Brazil, but then there's lots and lots that are spread throughout the world, working as Brazilian missionaries in other subcultures. This young man was one of our first students in our small group, Sydney, and just at the beginning, January of 2020, he became the new president of Word of Life Seminary. You can imagine the challenges that he faced, right? During a break time, the winter break there, the summer break, and then when students get back immediately, okay, we've got to shut things down, social isolation, everything else, and support dropping off because many people were unemployed. So if you remember somebody, Sydney's somebody to pray for sure. I did want to mention Word of Life because we have another connection with Word of Life now, and that's through Corey Williams. Mike and Lisa are with us this evening, but their daughter Corey went to Brazil, especially to study at the same Bible school. She went there at the end of December and is fluent in Portuguese now, right? Completely fluent, still learning. But classes started just this past Tuesday, so just a couple days ago, I guess. Was it yesterday or last week?
Well, it's actually next week. They're all quarantining right now, so they moved into their dorms, and they have some assignments. But they're just like 2 people per room right now, and the rest of them are at the family camp, but they'll all be.
Okay, all right.
About 10 days, I think, next week.
All right. So they're taking all the measures necessary. I heard that last semester, while they were open, not a single case of COVID among their students. So hopefully that will continue, that she'll be safe, and also learning, developing relationships. Moving on to Europe. Europe is a different beast compared to Latin America. So the population has grown. The overall pie here has grown in the 120 years, roughly doubled in size. But whereas Protestants comprised roughly 20% of the population in 1900, today it's a little over 10%, probably about 12% of the population of Protestants. That's painting with a very broad brush. So lots of different Protestants, and some of them evangelical, some of them not. So the church is struggling. In the meantime, material secularism has taken off. You had a very small percentage of secularists or atheists, agnostics in 1900. Well, that's grown to one of the larger groups. You have some other religions. Islam is growing very, very fast in Europe. So you have lots of things going on. In general, the church in Europe, the evangelical church, is small, marginalized, and discouraged. It's almost a persecuted group. So you go into communities, large cities many times in Spain or France or different parts of Western Europe, and you'll see a church of 10 people. 10 years ago it was 10 people, maybe 12. 20 years ago, not much changed. So just a lot of discouragement that's going on. But we've had the privilege of investing and partnering with another institution in Spain, which is really doing great work. It's called Berea Seminary. So there's a church that's associated with it that David Robles is pastoring. You can see the church building back at the back. In Leon, Spain, just miraculous story. I think it's been told already here, and I'm not going to retell it, but how the Lord gave them this property, using the city officials and whatnot, and basically they were gifted with this tremendous property, center of Leon, and even the funds to build this beautiful building. So David is a young pastor, as you can tell, very dynamic, very gifted expositor. Spoke here at Wildwood, if you were here in March 2019, so you can download that message if you like and hear his exposition. And he's also got this school that teaches others how to exposit the Bible. So it's a smaller group than what we had in Brazil, but very focused on working with people that are already pastors or they're lay leaders and helping them to teach a good Bible lesson or to preach a good Bible sermon. And God is already doing some really great things. So Wildwood has the privilege of investing part of their infrastructure and helping them out with gifts, some sizable gifts, in the last few years. And it's great to be able to partner with somebody that's making a difference, not just in Spain, but in much of the Spanish-speaking world, throughout the world. I want to play a short video now. This is David, and one of David's daughters, telling a little bit about what it's like to live in Leon.
Hello, greetings from León, Spain. My name is David Robles. I'm here with my youngest daughter, Sofia. We serve the Lord in the Evangelical Church of León and also the Berea Seminary. And we want to share with you a little bit of what God is doing here and just some things that are especially interesting for kids of your age, of things Sofia does here and how is life around Spain. Thank you for praying for us, and thank you also for supporting the ministry in Spain.
Hello, my name is Sofia. I'm 10 years old. We live in León, Spain. And well, my school is very close to my home, so I go walking most of the time.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And what are your favorite subjects at the school?
My favorite subjects at school are math, religion, and English.
So this, I think, is going to be interesting for most of the people, that you have a class of religion at school. So what do you do there?
There we learn about the Lord God, and we read a lot the Bible, so
That's great.
that's basically it.
That's very unique to our country, because in many places they don't have that privilege.
Yeah.
That's great. So what are the other hobbies you have or interests? What do you like to do?
Well, I love to play the cello. It's an instrument, and I go to the conservatory in León. It's a little far, so we have to go on car. And well, I love playing the cello, so.
Very good. So, what would you like the most of being part of a family that serves the Lord?
Well, I love that I get to learn about God, and they care about me, they love me, they treat me with kindness and patience. And well, I also love that I can go to church every Sunday if the Lord pleases, or I can watch on TV the church when my dad starts preaching, or anybody else. And well, I take notes to remember and to keep on track.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you, Sofia, and thank you, guys, for praying for us. Adios.
Bye. Adios.
Our kids in Johanna's got to see this last week, so I thought I'd just let everybody see it here. She's precious. It really is a sweet little girl, and two really, really sweet sisters as well. But the family is it's great. And with people like that, with David, firm in the scriptures, with a vision not just for people around him, but to help all of Spain hear the gospel and to learn about the Bible message. Really, God is doing a great work. His church, by the way, that building is pretty full. I got to go there one Sunday, and I don't know, sanctuary not quite this size, but there were probably 150 people gathered there, which is like a mega church for Spain. I want to move on. A few of the individuals, we have individuals in 5 different countries that we partner with as well. I won't go through all of those, but I do want to mention Richard and Johanna Oliveira. A couple of interesting things about them is that they're not from around here. They're from Brazil, and they were friends of ours, students of ours from years ago. And through a series of circumstances, he did a Doctor of Ministry program at Dallas Seminary, and working and helping them through that program. They came up to Wildwood, got to know Wildwood. So I've been here a couple times, in fact, and have gotten to know a number of people. So they're a partner that we support that's not from Oklahoma, not even from the U.S., and they're now in Hungary. So he worked for many years as a pastor in Brazil, then also as a Bible Institute leader. And just this past November, they moved from Brazil to Budapest, Hungary, where he's the leader of a Bible Institute there. And Hungary is one of the least reached countries. You think of Spain and France and all these others, but Hungary is one of the most difficult, partly because the language is super complicated, and then the people are fairly closed, just kind of closed to themselves. So there's lots of different challenges. But this Bible Institute, which meets in this castle is doing just a great work. Here are some of the students. And their desire is not necessarily to present the gospel to these Christian students, but to build them up so that they can be witnesses throughout Europe and many other countries besides Hungary. So Richard and Johanna, one of the couples that we support, they did mention in a recent letter that they were just thankful to the Lord for all the doors that He opened, because they left their work in northern Brazil December a couple months ago, and they had 2020 as their time to raise support. Well, again, you think about the connection with COVID. About every other person that they talked to had been recently unemployed, and churches were all saying, "Oh, it's difficult," and yet God opened up door after door for them to raise sufficient support to go to Hungary. And then their first visa application to get into the country. The country's very closed, literally. First visa application was denied. So they're thinking, what's going on? We feel called. What's going on? Well, unbeknownst to them, somebody initiated that same process again, and then when just a couple weeks passed, they were called and they said, "Oh, by the way, your visa application has been approved now." So just kind of out of the blue, and they had just a couple days to pack their bags and to get on the plane and get out of there. So they've been in Hungary, language learning, cultural learning, a lot of things, and Richard's already fully engaged with the ministry. Johanna's part of this Bible Institute as well. She teaches Hebrew and disciples a number of women as well. So very, very sharp couple.
An interesting thing about that school is when the Iron Curtain fell, Word of Life, they were able to get that 100-year lease on that castle for, it was like a penny. It was like miraculous, and that's how the Bible school got started. I just think that's interesting.
A few of the other partners, the Bennetts, Matt and Elizabeth, are working in northern Italy, in Bologna. Yes? It's kind of a mixture. Probably about half, I think, are Hungarian, but they'll come from Germany, from other parts of Europe, as well as even a few other countries. The instruction's in English, so we'll have a number of visiting professors. Each week is a different subject. They have a few Hungarian staff, I guess, that do teach in Hungarian, but that will be translated into English, so that many times the students only speak English as the common language. I'd recommend it if you have any interest in going. They take all comers, and we have actually known a number of people that have studied there. Matt and Elizabeth are working with Crew in northern Italy, in Bologna, and a small university in that town of 100,000 students. They are a part of a mega team, para-Christian organization with 4 people working, so one other couple and the Bennetts. And it's the only Christian organization that's working on that campus. So you can imagine, okay, you take this 25,000 students over here, I'll take that one, and split it up that way. But they're a great couple, newly married. They've been more under lockdown in their married life than they have with freedom to circulate. And you know how it was in Italy for so many months, an extreme lockdown. They couldn't even leave. They had to have permission to go to the store and to do just basic things. But while they've been there, they've been reaching out to students, and they've engaged them in a virtual sense. So it's just amazing their persistence and the context that they've been able to develop. Kurt and Cheryl have been in France for a long time, and people joke, in fact, that they're both French now. They just have an American passport. He's from Oklahoma, but they're just completely adapted. And after planting a couple churches in France that were they became kind of immigrant churches, which nothing wrong with that, but they really wanted to reach French people, native Frenchmen. So they moved into the heart of Paris, and Kermit is very cutting edge in what he does to reach out to people. I'd like to be able to explain it in more detail, but he's one of the most thoughtful, kind of an apologist in some sense. You think of a Josh McDowell type. That's Kermit in Paris, and they're just doing a great work there. Kat's in Bosnia, so behind the former Iron Curtain. And then Talis. Talis is another non-North American that we support. He's partnered with him for many, many years, and he works in the country of Latvia. So in Latvia, another organization Latvian Christian radio that Wildwood has had a long connection with, and I'm going to invite Bruce to come up and talk about that.
Hey, thanks, Kevin. And I tell you, it's pretty emotional for me to sit over here and listen to this. And the reason why is when I came here more than 40 years ago, Wildwood was a very small group. We had no missionaries at all. And of course, over the years, that's changed. We at Wildwood, we had a Wildwood family that was praying. We had a Wildwood family that was going, like Kevin and Becca. And you see the ripple impact and the domino effect of their ministry. And then we have people who've been investing. And so it's emotional to me. I'm sitting here going, I can't believe what God has done and what God is doing right now. But I want to tell you very quickly a little bit about Latvia. Some of you don't know anything about it, but it's a Eastern European country that was taken over by the Soviet Union in World War II, size of about West Virginia. And I was invited to go there in 1990, and I did not want to go. And the reason why was there was a lot of disruption in the nation. Soviet army was threatening to start shooting people and blowing things up. I had 4 young kids. I'm thinking, why in the world would I go to a place like that I've never been to? But I really felt like God was leading me to do it, and so I stepped out on some faith and we went. And it's been the most incredible adventure about how God has used this church to have an incredible impact, really in many ways all over the world through what's going on in Latvia. Talis that you saw the picture of a little earlier there, he is the director, really the president of Latvian Christian Radio. We were involved in helping get it started. Nowadays, if you want to tune into the country, there's 120,000 people in the country of Latvia who listen regularly to Latvian Christian Radio. And one of the things that we do from here at Wildwood, the Bible messages that I teach get transliterated, and they get translated, and then they get presented by one of the leading actors in Latvia in the Latvian language, and so that's broadcast on a regular basis. And not only are they reaching 120,000 people with the gospel, with Christian music, and also with the Bible teaching, and the only other scheduled Bible teacher on there is Charles Stanley, so it's the Bruce Hess and Charles Stanley thing that's going on there. But it amazes me what God has done over the years. And now, Latvian Christian Radio, because so many Latvians, the economy is so bad, they've filtered out into other nations, and some of them even fled during World War II. And so now we're reaching, with Latvian Christian Radio, 12 other countries. And I have them written down here so I can remember them. There's Latvians who listen in the Latvian language in the UK, that is in England and Ireland, in Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Norway, Spain, Germany, the Czech Republic, Russia, Australia, Canada, and the USA. So it's a pretty incredible thing that God is using so that the messages that we give here are going out to all those various nations on a weekly basis. Can you just hit the next picture there? One of the big things that's happened in recent times, for those of you who know that they used to be involved in being in a building on the 6th floor attic of the Baptist building, with 108 stairs to get up to the top. And one of the things that Talis said to me a number of years ago is he said, I don't think we're using the Lord's money properly because we're paying such high rent. So the dream was to buy their own building. And this is the new building that they've moved into where Latvian Christian Radio is found. He's a photographer, and you can see the incredible sun coming through. He knows how to capture all that kind of stuff. But it's been an incredible deal to be able to. He had this vision, and he said, you know what, we need to raise $480,000 to buy this building. And I honestly thought, that's crazy. See, in Latvia, the average income is $16,000 a year, but that's for the people who live in the main cities. You go out into the countryside, and most people are making less than $1,000 a year, and their cost of living is way higher than it is here. And yet, God did this in a period of about a year and a quarter, where $480,000 was raised to buy this facility. And it's just been incredible. It's been a wonderful thing. They've gotten a lot more interaction and visitors who come. You might want to back up for a minute. You don't have to go up 108 stairs to see the Christian radio station. You can just walk in right through the door there. And I just want to tell you a couple quickie stories. You know how low the income is. In fact, most of the people who give, and by the way, in Latvia, radio is like it was in the 1950s here. In other words, a lot of people listen to radio there. And the average gift is maybe $5, $10, $20 a month, oftentimes from these retired ladies who come and give. Well, one of the things he just told me about, I didn't even hear about this, and this is weird when you think of Latvia and the former Soviet Union. One of the very first gifts they got from inside the country was $86,000. $86,000. It came from a lady whose name was Rita, and her last name began with an M. Well, they, of course, were amazed that anybody in Latvia could give that kind of money, and so they started to try to track this person down, to talk to them. They couldn't find anybody by that name in Latvia, and then they eventually found someone in a Latvian community in the U.S. And so he called over and said, "Hey, I heard you listen to Christian radio." I go, "Nope, never heard of it." So it wasn't that person. And then that was at the beginning of the campaign. At the end of the campaign, they got another check from Rita for $85,000. And so again, they're just thinking, who in the world? It took them another year to track down this person. And this is the way God works in such special ways. He found out that Rita actually went to his childhood Baptist church and was friends with his parents. And she had been listening since 1993 to Latvian Christian radio, and he never knew anything about it. And yet she wanted to do something special and invest that kind of money. One other thing, just to show you how God is working in a special way, they just found out recently there was a Latvian man who lived in Boston, and he listened to Latvian Christian radio every single day, and he died about a month ago. They never knew about this guy, but he was listening over the internet, and they found out about it when his two sons contacted Latvian Christian radio and said, "We want to give a memorial gift in the name of our Father to Latvian Christian radio for all the ministry that it's had." So it's an incredible ministry. One other thing we do in Latvia is annually we've been sponsoring an orphan camp for orphaned and disadvantaged kids, but last year we couldn't do it because of COVID. We're not going to be able to do it this year, but we hope in the future, maybe June of 22, we can go back to Latvia and do that camp.
Just a little bit of a break from the sequence of things. But if you're wondering about how you might be able to get involved, certainly we're looking for people that want to commit to long-term service. And actually we have several that are kind of in that pipeline right now. So they're particularly college students that come to OU, that get a vision for missions, and Wildwood is basically their home church or one of their home churches. So that's just it's a real privilege that we have to do that. But there's other ways that we can get involved. If you would like, you've got a little blue half-page thing that you got when you came in. If you would like to receive updates from one of our partners, there's different levels of security, so we didn't want to just publish emails. But if you would like to get in contact, usually it's a quarterly deal or sometimes a little bit more frequent than that, that they'll send an update to people that they know, and just let people know. There's no hard sell there. It's not like, oh, please help us or we're going to die. But just to get updates for prayer. If you would like also just to receive updates in general, we're going to start a monthly update where we'll shine the spotlight on one of our partners, give a few different prayer requests either from them or from a couple other people, and then talk about a little bit about what Wildwood is doing in a general way. So we'd love to keep you informed going on from here. In the fall, there will also be, as we've done in a few different years recently, we're going to have a missions emphasis week, and it's primarily 2 weekends, but then there'll be a few activities during the week itself, and that'll be in early November. So it's pretty big to do. If you were here for the last one, which focused on Latin America, David Robles, you might remember that there was quite a few things going on. Well, we'd like to do something similar, this time the focus being the Middle East. So we're anxious to have help come and join us. The Globe Outreach team, some of the people that are here tonight, is very active throughout the year, but they especially help at times like this. OU has a great program called Friends to International Students, which they promote and which many of the international students would come to study here are eager to participate in, and they just need families or individuals in the community that are willing to meet these people, sometimes 2 or 3 times a semester, have them over to your house, take them up to Walmart, or just do something fun. This past year obviously has been a little bit different, but there's still international students around that would like to be a part of this program, and sometimes there's just not enough families. So Wildwood, a lot of different families at Wildwood have participated with that. And then also short-term ministry trips. This is all Lord willing when we get past some of the craziness. Mexico, probably in November of this year. Phil Chain has received a number of people from Wildwood. January of 2022, Becca and another lady from the church are planning on going back to Palestine on a medical mission. Italy, going to Bologna, where the Bennetts are working on that campus. If you speak English, you're qualified, because that's a great draw among these students. And then in Brazil, I'll be leading a trip going to the Compassion site and taking a number of families. So if you're sponsoring a child and would like to meet them personally, or if you'd just like to see the community and see the work that God's doing, that would be a great opportunity to do that. Well, it's been quick, and maybe we need to plan on doing this again sometime. In the fall, in November, when we have our Missions Emphasis Week, we'll provide some more snapshots and kind of fill in the blanks a little bit with different partners. But thank you for coming tonight, and if you have any other questions, I know some of them were written down, and we didn't really have a chance to get to all the questions that there might have been. But if you have some questions, I'd be glad to stay up here or just outside in the hallway and try to answer those as best I can. Thank you. Oh, yeah, as you're leaving here, just do the appropriate check marks on your blue half sheet, and you can leave that out there with Sherry and the volunteers. Okay? Thank you very much.